Welcome everybody to this episode of London Futurists video, where the subject is the future of religion, and in particular, Cosmism and the future of religion. So what is Cosmism? I'm going to be joined in conversation by Giulio Prisco, who has written extensively, very interestingly, about Cosmism and religion. In fact, his book is called Tales of the Turing Church, subtitled Hacking Religion. The subtitle goes on, and we'll talk about the rest of it later. So, Giulio, why do we need a religion in today's world? Why shouldn't we just be content to see the power of religion fade away? And why are you interested in hacking religion?
That's a very good question. First question, David, and first, thank you very much for having me. Why do we need religion? I think we do need something like religion, which doesn't necessarily have to be one of the traditional religions that most people are familiar with. We need it to have a sense of hope in the future, in our wonderful future, in our astounding universe. Since thousands of years, religion, again, some formulation of religion, has been the main bridge to connect people to this sense of hope that, in my opinion, is a necessary condition for life.
Cosmism, as I understand, makes a very bold claim. It says that as we individually are facing the prospect of death, personal extinction, we should bear in mind the possibility that in the future, our descendants, perhaps, who have become more capable, mastering technology more fully, not only will these future humans have the power to create life, which we almost do already, but these future humans will have the ability to resurrect the dead, to bring back into a state of consciousness those who have died. In fact, all of those who have died at any time in history previously. So this seems a very bold claim. What's the reason for giving any credence to this possibility, Giulio?
Let me say that the idea is not new. In some form, it has been anticipated by traditional religions, without underlining the fact that the process of universal resurrection may have something to do with our human science and technology. For example, the central message of religion is that we will be resurrected somehow by direct intervention of God. Historically, the term Cosmism originates in a fascinating school of thought that originated in Russia between the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. The founder of this philosophical school was Nikolai Fyodorov, and he was, I think, the first to make the direct link between resurrection and future science and technology. He said it very clearly, that as soon as we develop these scientific and technological capabilities, future humanity will have to unite in what Fyodorov called the common task. And the common task is to resurrect all the dead of the past by using advanced science and technology. Fyodorov founded this school of thought, to which a lot of other important thinkers belonged. I have to mention the best known one, which is Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, the founder of modern spaceflight theory and the founding father of the Russian space program. All these things happened between the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. But today, here and now, the cosmist way of thinking is kind of experiencing a renaissance. And we have more and more talks and papers and books dedicated to it. In particular, I want to recommend the very clear introduction to Cosmism given in the book Transcendence by R.U. Sirius, the guy who edited the Mondo 2000. Again, let me do some self-promotion. You can read all that here in my book, which is also available in Kindle version.
So the example of the link between the faith of Cosmism and the development of the Russian, the Soviet space exploration, the inspiration that people in the rocket business gained from that faith is a good example of how religious belief can inspire hope. It can inspire people to great endeavors, but it doesn't mean that it's true, and it doesn't mean that such a belief is credible in today's time. So again, let me ask you, what is it about science and technology that you think can be used to bring back people whose bodies have long since decomposed, whose memories have vanished completely, whose thoughts are no longer accessible? How could the future humans have such an ability to reconstitute you and me and our ancestors into conscious thinking beings again?
The development of ultra technologies for resurrection will be based on future science that we don't understand yet. What we do understand, looking at modern science, is that there is no incompatibility between what science is telling us of the fundamental nature of reality and the possibility to resurrect the dead. I could give many examples, but I think we'll be discussing this at length in this talk. The concept is that the physical universe kind of remembers things, which means that after something has happened, the information is not irretrievably lost, but remains in the universe somehow, in ways that future science will be able to understand and future technology will be able to exploit in order to collect all the information from the past, which is needed to resurrect a person, and resurrect that person by using a process which might be called mind uploading to the future. The concept is that you go back in time somehow. I don't know how, but I know that the concept is not incompatible with today's science. To go back in time, read all the relevant information that constitutes the identity of a human being and re-instantiate this information on whatever computational support might be equal to the task in the future.
So I think one idea is that the information spreads out and somehow it can be collected together again, a bit like the ripples in a pond spread out everywhere. But
Yes.
If you had a big enough collector, you could infer back what was the conditions at the start of that.
Yes.
That seems a huge task, but I admit we can't rule it out. But you also suggest it might be possible in two different ways, I think, in different parts of your book. One is that we could actually reach back through, or our future descendants could reach back through time. So it wouldn't be a matter of having to collect together information that's already spread. It'd be able to go back to the origin by some bending of space and time.
That also cannot be ruled out. In fact, I gave one specific example in the book of how perhaps our descendants will be able to do that by exploiting some complicated things that happen to neutrinos in the multidimensional universe of contemporary string theory. But that again is one of many examples.
Well, I have to say there are lots of fascinating examples in the book. The huge number of references. People who are curious about some of these ideas will find lots of remarkable ideas that they can explore further via the references you give. So I see that perhaps science may make this possible. We don't understand enough to give any strong views whether it will or will not be possible. But don't you also have to assume that we humans will survive long enough and that we won't destroy ourselves along the process? When we are contemplating what might happen to ourselves in a resurrection, don't we have to assume that humanity won't be destroyed in the meantime by one of a number of existential risks that we are facing?
Strictly speaking, no, we don't have to assume that, because the role of, how to say, resurrection service provider might be done not only by future humans, but also by whatever other hyper-advanced civilization exists in the universe. So, strictly speaking, no, but of course we would like to think that humanity will continue to exist, that humanity will overcome all the problems of today's world. Well, we will have other problems, of course. I don't believe in future utopias without any problem. We will have problems, of course, but perhaps and hopefully not the same problems that we are facing now. We want to think of that. I like to think that future humanity will expand without limits, will fill the universe and ignite the universe with life. By the way, let me pay homage to Freeman Dyson, who sadly passed away a couple of days ago, who shared this vision of intelligent life colonizing the physical universe and become master of reality with capabilities that we cannot even imagine now. We want to think of that, and we want to think that yes, the agent that will resurrect us in the future will be our own descendants in a future version of humanity. We want to think that, which is the fundamental insight of cosmist philosophy. And we need to take all the steps here and now that we can take to ensure the flourishing of humanity into the universe. While on the one hand, our ideas may sound very abstract, very future-oriented, eschatological, metaphysical, I think our idea gives us also a very powerful motivation to do our best here and now on this little planet to make sure that humanity continues to exist and spreads out there among the stars in the universe, developing all the scientific knowledge and all the technical abilities that will be needed, sometime which may be very far in the future, to resurrect the dead from the past.
Why will these future humans, or possibly other alien life forms, who might perform this, I like your phrase, resurrection service provision, why would they be interested in doing that? After all, we humans, we don't seem to care much about many of the other animals or life forms on this planet. We don't think that we have an obligation to resurrect all the small insects and even smaller animals. Why would these vastly powerful aliens in the future care about bringing us back to life?
Think of our own history and the evolution of our thinking in the last few centuries, at least. We used to be completely careless toward all sorts of animals. We slaughtered animals, did all sorts of bad things. But if you look at today's culture, you see that there begins to be a lot of concern for the welfare of all forms of life on the planet. So in this respect, and from the point of view of other forms of life, the situation has very much improved in only a few centuries. It has improved with progress of our culture. Now we're talking of a cultural evolution over a much longer time span, centuries, millennia, even longer. So I think compassion for other thinking beings will continue to grow. And in fact, I think universal compassion will have to be a defining feature of very advanced civilization.
You said this should fill us with hope and a bigger vision for the future possibilities. What steps should we be taking to make this future more likely?
I think we should first continue to exist. Then we should continue to develop our scientific understanding of reality. Then we should continue to develop our technology that enable us to influence and control reality. And then we should continue to develop our spiritual insights and our feeling of universal compassion toward other life.
What about taking steps to preserve as much memories of ourselves as possible? There are people who like the idea of creating, is it mind files or digital records of themselves to make it easier for future possible resurrection service providers to recreate us. Is that a priority in your view?
It's a nice thing, but it's not really a priority in my view. I mean, I'm very interested in these things. I have discussed many times with people like Bill Bambridge and Martin Rothblatt on the prospect of reconstructing a person via mind files. By the way, let me mention that a mind file is kind of a version of your Facebook timeline on steroids, meaning a very complete collection of everything that you have written. It's a nice concept, but just thinking on the technical feasibility of the concept, I think even if I spend the rest of my life typing very fast on this computer, blogs and diaries and thoughts and things, whatever I manage to produce in a few decades will not come even close to being enough to reconstruct in the future the entirety of myself. I mean, our interface technology is not fast enough. Even if you spend your life writing a blog, you won't even capture the 0.1 of 0.1 of 0.1% of what it means to be you. So that's kind of hopeless, I think. Now, future technologies of very high-speed brain-computer interfacing, which may be developed sometimes in this century, but I'm really talking of technologies order of magnitude faster than whatever we have now. Technologies able to capture the entirety of your mental landscape in very rich detail. With this future technology, well, the answer switches from no to maybe. But it's nothing that concerns you and I anyway, because whenever it happens, even if later in this century, you and I will be dead at that time, I believe. I'm sorry for saying that. This is what I think. What works for us is kind of an act of faith. Faith in the capabilities of some kind of future technologies operated by either our descendants or someone else to fish all the information from the river of time and reconstruct the information in a future world.
I think there needs to be another part of the faith as well, isn't there? It's the faith that by collecting this information together, all my memories, all your memories, that somehow we will be there as well. Whereas it seems to me that we are more than just our memories. There's some kind of consciousness which is hard to understand and hard to explain, but you've got to have the faith that our consciousness will come back as well as just our memories. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. I agree. We don't know yet what consciousness is. There are many points of view and the experts disagree, which means that we don't really know yet. I personally sympathize with the view of consciousness as something which intrinsically belongs to the fabric of fundamental physical reality. You may call this panpsychism. It has been called like that. And is physically manifested in reality by some weird quantum effects that we are beginning to understand. Very slowly, but we are beginning to understand all these things. Now, when it comes to the relation between consciousness on the one hand and memories and thoughts on the other hand, I tend to think that, consciousness is basically one. There is no such things as my consciousness and your consciousness. No, we are both manifestation, physical manifestation of the consciousness that is intrinsic in matter. And when we feed one information stream, for example, my information stream, to consciousness at large, you get me. When you feed your information stream, then consciousness becomes you. And this means that assuming that at some point in the future, we will be able to reproduce consciousness on alternative substrates, which will likely be very different from whatever sort of computer we can imagine now, then yes, we will be able to reconstruct conscious beings that don't exist anymore, if we can get hold of the information.
Can you point to any evidence in favor of this idea of panpsychism, that consciousness might be a fundamental part of reality at a deeper level, rather than the prevailing thinking, which is that consciousness emerges from the very particular circumstances of the brain?
Well, these very particular circumstances of the brain could be linked to quantum reality themselves. The best evidence that I can see for the existence of consciousness in the lowest levels of fundamental reality comes from quantum physics, where, using a very simplified formulation, elementary particles seem to make conscious choices. There is even a theorem called free will theorem, which originates from the same John Conway, who invented the game of life. And according to the free will theorem, it can be demonstrated that if we, you and I, have consciousness, then it has to be assumed that elementary particles must have some kind of elementary consciousness as well. Otherwise, things simply don't add up. So yes, I think this is the best, not demonstration. We don't even know what consciousness is, so we cannot demonstrate anything when it comes to consciousness, but it represents suggestive evidence for the presence of consciousness in the bedrock of fundamental reality.
So as we both know, the interpretation of quantum mechanics is a deep and controversial subject. I should mention in passing, I actually used to attend lectures by John Conway in Cambridge in the late 1970s and early 1980s. By chance, we were at the same college, Gonville and Keyes College, and also by chance, Stephen Hawking was there too. So I somehow was in the presence of wonderful thinkers. I still remember being astonished at some of John Conway's lectures about the whole sequence of infinities, each more remarkable and each more astonishing than the previous ones. That's feeling that stays with me 40 years later. But in terms of making sense of quantum mechanics, I have long leaned towards the interpretation of Hugh Everett that we don't need a consciousness to intervene to collapse the wave function or whatever, that the universe consists of multiple branches which split and fragment, and you refer in your book to the work by Sean Carroll, a book that I found persuasive, deeply persuasive recently, his book Something Deeply Hidden, which he defends this interpretation of Everett, not in terms of many worlds so much as there are branches which become separate. It seems to me that there's nothing in quantum mechanics itself that implies that we need to have consciousness throughout the whole of the universe.
I also like Hugh Everett interpretation a lot, even though I wouldn't call it many words interpretation, and all that is discussed in my book. Everett's used to be my favorite interpretation of quantum mechanics, and of course I read and enjoyed a lot the last book of Sean Carroll. But at some point I realized that in the standard Everett interpretation, there is no free will. There is no free will, there is not my free will, there is not your free will, there is not the free will of God, because Everett's multiverse is really a multiverse where everything that can happen happens somewhere in some branch of the multiverse. So there is no choice. Now, I happen to think that choice is fundamental to consciousness. The cogito ergo sum of Descartes should really be a lego ergo sum, following an existentialist writer. I cannot really demonstrate that, and I cannot elaborate either, but it seems something completely obvious to me, that there cannot be real consciousness without the ability to make choices. I don't really take seriously any model of physical reality that is not compatible with free will. And that seems to be the case of Everett's interpretation as it is traditionally formulated. But having said that, perhaps things are not exactly like that. What my intuition tells me is that there is more than one word, but less than all possible words. Somewhere in the process of actualization of quantum possibility, something or somebody makes a choice, so that we do end with different universes, but not all possible universes. And an example, which is very well argued for in the book of David Deutsch, The Fabric of Reality, it makes sense to consider other times as particular cases of other universes in Everett's multiverse. As a matter of fact, this seems to be the only sensible way to consider other times. So if you think of the multiverse, we already have something more than this snapshot. We have all the other snapshots of other times, yesterday, the day before, and all that. Is already much more than one universe. And now going back to the point that we were discussing before, of a repository of information where everything that happens in physical reality is recorded. Well, this formulation of Everett's multiverse, just think of the other times, don't think of the other possibilities. But this concept of multiverse, which only includes other times, is indeed a repository of information that includes everything that has ever happened in the universe, and by developing technologies able to read this information, we will be able to re-instantiate in this today's branch of the multiverse what happened in a branch located 100 years in the past, or 1,000,000 years in the past.
So I can see how it's possible to imagine that this science might be possible. I can see that people could make a choice to hope that this is true. But let me ask you about a criticism I've heard leveled against your book, which is that it might lead people to not take the necessary steps to preserve themselves, to preserve their brains via, for example, cryonics. So this is something that's personally very significant to me, as I'm now in my 60s. I don't have any cryonic service lined up, and I'm evaluating what's the probable future course of my life. And I could spend money and time signing up for cryonics, which I think would give me a higher probability of continuing to exist at some stage in the future. Or I could say, well, let's put my faith instead in the ideas of Cosmism. Then how would you advise people facing such a decision? Should we, if possible, cover both bases by signing up for cryonics as well as hoping that technological resurrection is possible?
Yeah, this is the objection of Robin Hanson and some other people. Well, you know, first, let me say that I'm a big fan of cryonics. I really hope that it works, and I don't see any reason why it shouldn't work. Some forms of cryonics, I think, will work. Incidentally, I am a life member of the Cryonics Institute, and I used to be signed up for cryonic suspension via life insurance. Then what happened? It happened that at some point I didn't have as much money as I used to. And when I had to choose between cryonics and putting food on the table for my family, I chose putting food on the table for my family. And I would do exactly that choice today and anytime. As far as motivation is concerned, to me, is exactly the other way around. The fact that I do hope in some form of resurrection is what gives me the hope and the energy to get out of bed in the morning and trying to do something good. If I didn't have this conviction or this hope, as you say, and things would be so pointless to me that, well, I believe I would log off soon. But my cosmist conviction in future resurrection, which we haven't touched to this point yet, it is identical to traditional religion, is what gives me hope, energy, and motivation to do all things that I do.
We'll come back in a minute as we close the interview to the reaction of traditional religious believers to the vision of Cosmism. But I'd like just to stick with the cryonics question a little bit longer. I agree with you that cryonics is expensive, too expensive for most people today. Shouldn't that be a reason to put lots of energy into finding ways to make cryonics more reliable and more affordable? Isn't that what a lot of people should be giving their time to, so that in 10 years' time, people will no longer say, I'd love to sign up for cryonics, but I can't because I don't have the resources available?
You know, I don't really like to tell people what they should be giving their time to. The thing is that the world is very interesting, and it is interesting because you are different from me. It's different because my wife, who is in the other room, is different from us. You don't have to do everything yourself, because whatever good thing there is to be done, there would be someone, and perhaps someone smarter or with more resources than you have, who wants to do that thing. Let people do what they want. The world is big enough to have enough people to do important things. Let's take an example which is very popular today, of the preservation of the environment. I never write about that, but that doesn't mean that I'm not interested in it. In fact, preserving the environment is one of the things that we must do to get closer to the cosmic future that I envision. I don't write anything and I don't do anything about the preservation of the environment, because there are already people who write much better than me and have more resources than I have, who are focused on that. I don't need to add my voice to theirs. I think everyone should choose what is the best contribution that he or she can give to the rest of the world. And I think the best contribution that I can give myself is to promote existential hope in the concept of universal resurrection in a wonderful future universe of which we will be a part. You organize the London Futurist meetings, and I have been to a few of them, and I think it is an absolutely awesome thing. I regret that I don't live in London, because if I lived in London, I would come to your meetings every week. And that's the contribution that you are giving, among so many other things, of course. And all our friends are focusing on one thing, which in their opinion is important, and is something that they want to do. Everybody should try to do that.
Let's come back to the question of the future of religion. You have said that Cosmism is a way to make sense of some of the traditional religious claims. What has been the reaction of people in different religions? Have they listened to your ideas and seen them as alien, competition, or have they shown an interest? Indeed, is there possibly a flow in the other way, that people might start off being antagonistic to all forms of religion, get interested in Cosmism, and then move on to adopting more elements of a traditional religious faith?
At the very beginning of the introduction of my book, I say at the same time two different things. The first is that this, what I'm discussing, is not your grandfather's religion, because we're talking of science, we're talking of future technological resurrection, we are speculating of scientifically inspired concepts of God, and that doesn't look like a traditional religion at all. But you can reformulate all that in a way to underline and emphasize the parallels between what I'm writing about and what traditional religion says, all traditional religions. And you come to the conclusion that we are actually saying the same thing. What am I saying in the book? I'm saying that everyone will be resurrected in the future. I'm saying that intelligent life will colonize the bedrock of fundamental reality and acquire godlike abilities to control the physical universe. And even saying that the traditional concepts of God that we find in religion are completely compatible with the worldview that science is beginning to offer us. And even saying that in some sense, the simulation hypothesis itself, which is evidently another way of expressing the core cosmologies of traditional religions, the simulation hypothesis itself is essentially compatible with the picture of physical reality that I propose in the last few chapters of my book. mean compatibility over compatibility over compatibility. I believe that I'm saying, using the scientific knowledge of today and the language that we use today, I'm saying exactly the same things that the prophets of traditional religions have said at their time, using the language of their time, and illustrating their words with the scientific knowledge that they had available at that time. A few hundred years in the future, my ideas that I outline in my book will seem hopelessly naive, and they will be replaced by other much more sophisticated formulation of ideas which are essentially compatible, just formulated in different words. So I think this is the relation between our ideas and traditional religions. We are saying exactly the same things, in other words.
But most people, if you ask them about religion, will think about things like services of worship, of prayers, of communities meeting together, perhaps of doing charitable good works, perhaps dietary code or dress codes, perhaps going on pilgrimage. Are any of these things in Cosmism?
Cosmism doesn't belong to me. I can only talk about my own formulation of Cosmism. For example, Ben Goertzel has also written a lot about the Cosmism, and he could give you different answers to this point. There is a section in my book which is called Cosmology is Not Geography. In that book section, I say that, you have two different things in all religions, and actually in all organized worldviews. You have deep cosmological visions on the one hand, and on the other hand, we have what I like to call geography and zoning norms. Dietary codes, lifestyle codes. I don't really give a damn about any of that, and I don't think God doesn't care at all. This is my point of view. I realize, of course, that many believers, and perhaps most believers, are very interested in the geography of their religion much more than they are interested in its cosmology. So they don't really want to hear about parallels between the concept of God and the concept of quantum fields. They do want to hear about what they should eat on Friday, or what kind of sex they're allowed to have and with whom, all these kind of things. Well, let me just disagree. To everyone, whatever they like. I'm personally not interested in these things. I do cosmology, and I don't do geography. Now, these things like dietary restrictions are only a part of what you started mentioning. You also mentioned other things: charity work, community, and these aspects of religion, which, strictly speaking, they are also what I call geography, but this geography is good. And in fact, this has been a very important role of religion, to create community, to do charity works, to take care of the weakest members of the community. I think that is very important, and that is one of the features of religion that I certainly hope will be preserved by future religions.
You mentioned the phrase, God doesn't care about diet or...
My God doesn't care. The God that I'm describing doesn't care.
But many people's religion involves a sense that God will be rewarding some and punishing others, that we are obliged to behave in certain ways or believe certain things, to have faith in particular prophets or Christs or Messiahs, and that if we do that, we will be resurrected in some future time, and those who don't, won't, and they might be dispatched into a torment of hell, or they may just face permanent extinction. Is there any notion in your God that there is a choice and that God will reward some with eternal life and not others?
I think resurrection will be for everyone. I could elaborate and discuss special personality re-engineering that some resurrected beings may need, according to the opinion of whoever performs the resurrection service. But, that would be an interesting discussion, but sort of leaves me cold. There may be some suggestions for improvement, and perhaps in some cases there should be, but I'm not really focused on that. God has a universe of billions of galaxies and billions of intelligent civilizations to manage, whatever God is. Why should God be interested in what I eat on Fridays? What should God be interested in all that? It sounds so ridiculous to me that I cannot even think that we are having this conversation. God has really other things to do, much more important things to do.
In such a case, why would God of this vast number of galaxies, why would that God be interested in us as individuals at all? Why would God want to resurrect us?
Here, the compassion argument that I started with, that we, as our culture evolves, we are more and more compassionate toward everyone. I think this compassion argument applies. And when you get to infinite power, which is one of the definitions of God, it seems kind of plausible that you get to infinite compassion as well. But what does compassion have to do with the color of the shirt I'm wearing? Black is one of my favorite colors, but if you want, you can interpret it in a bad way. Also, red is a color that I like very much. If you want, you can interpret it in a bad way. If you want, you can interpret anything in a bad way. You don't have to.
So, Giulio, we've had a fascinating discussion. I have to say we haven't covered even a good fraction of the ideas in your book. I had a lot more that I thought we might talk about, but we probably should draw this conversation to a close. Are there any other things that you would like to emphasize as takeaway messages that need to be added into the conversation?
Well, perhaps there is one takeaway message that I do not spell out very clearly in the book. And in fact, I've been thinking about that in the last couple of days. And let's dedicate a few minutes to that. Now, I consider myself as a believer, but as I think is clear from this conversation, I'm not really a traditional believer. Now, I do believe in the things that I have said, like I believe in science fiction. In which sense do I believe in science fiction? Now, think of some of the very detailed future universes that have been described in science fiction masterpieces, like, for example, Ian Banks' Culture series or the Orion's Arm universe. These are the two best examples that come to my mind. Now, do I think that things will happen exactly like that? No, I don't. There will be a lot of variations, and things will not be exactly like that. But in some sense, I think these two pictures, which are also different from one another, are valid because each includes some elements that I think will be features of the future universe in which our descendants will live. My belief in science fiction is not a literal belief. It's more like a belief in the fact that something like that will happen, and that something is good enough for me to want to do something to make it happen. And I believe in religion in exactly the same way.
Well, that's a very interesting summary. I have to tell viewers that there is a lot more in Giulio's book about science fiction. Looks at the work of a number of authors, Olaf Stapleton, Arthur C. Clarke, Stephen Baxter, and many others. There's sections to do with links with other religious ideas, whether it's Indian religious ideas, Christian religious ideas, including the Mormon Transhumanist Association, as well as the Christian Transhumanist Association. There's a section also on possible Muslim transhumanism and approaches to science and resurrection. There's lots about science, which we've touched on, and there's lots about philosophy too. So it is an excellent workout for the brain, and it fulfills what it says on the subtitle. It's not only about hacking religion, it's also about enlightening science, awakening technology. Giulio Prisco, I think your book is going to resonate with many people for a long time to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, David.